Guys, welcome to another episode of Black British Parents Podcast. And we have another amazing guest today, Rachel. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Duncan and I'm the co-founder of a campaign called Sit Up to Stand Up to Knife Violence, and that was born out of quite tragic circumstances. My nephew James, he was attacked in Mitesfield, Brixton in February 2021. He survived, however he's got severe life-changing injuries. So I'm just here to shed a light on his journey, the family's journey, and everything else that I do within communities and my professional work in life.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for joining us for this episode today. This is something I definitely wanted to address, but it's a very sensitive subject, and I wanted to be able to do it when we do reflect on it, this issue in a sensitive way and in a way that it deserves. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Fortunately, we have a bit of history,
yes,
so that makes it a bit more of a, not easy, but easier conversation. So your nephew, can you tell us what happened to him?
Yeah, so he...
And when it happened as well?
Yeah, so this happened February 2021, still in the middle of COVID. So a bit of context for that, it was very hard dealing with all of that when it happened during COVID times. He was came home from work, got a bike for his mum because everyone wanted to get fit, after lockdown, and tried to go out there and get fit. So he brought a bike, was fixing his bike up for his mum, and went to test ride it to make sure it's safe for her to ride. And unfortunately, some boys from a different area, gang in a different area, came and stabbed him multiple times. Well, they knocked him off his bike first and stabbed him. They thought he was part of the gang that lived in that area. My nephew wasn't in a gang, not known, not affiliated, was just a ordinary hard-working black boy in London, working, studying, looking after my daughter, the family. And I think one thing I'd like to mention is that even if you're in a gang or not in a gang, this shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't.
I agree. Unfortunately, sometimes when we hear these stories, sometimes the perspective from our community could be, well, you might not think he was in a gang, but he potentially was. And that can be quite hard for families hearing and seeing those things being said about their family. So he was knocked off his bike and stabbed.
Yeah.
Can you explain? I don't want to... but can you explain where and how it affected him?
Yeah, so he was stabbed 5 times, and he was stabbed in his stomach. But the stomach injury, if you look at his scar, and he probably won't show it to you, it's a very small scar considering the injury that was damaged to him internally. So the internal injuries, he was stabbed in his stomach, and it went through, lacerated his liver, into the lungs, and it nicked his aorta of his heart. So internally, that was a mess. Like they really damaged him. But then they also proceeded to stab him in his legs and also his arm. And the arm injury was the most severe visually, because his arm was just exposed. The bone was exposed. There was so much blood. This is recorded from my sister, and I believe he's tried to get himself in a protective stance, and that's why he sustained more stab injuries as well. And knowing that that's what he's done, and the boys continued to stab him when he's trying to protect himself, that really hurts me. So he bled out. He suffered a catastrophic cardiac arrest. His heart stopped for 55 minutes. He was clinically dead for nearly an hour. So he suffers with a severe hypoxic brain injury. And he's now, as a result of that, his muscles are very contracted, and he's now in a wheelchair. He's a wheelchair user. I think a lot of people think he's paralysed, and I know a lot of Instagram pages and media has reported that he's paralysed. He's not paralysed. Thank God he's got the use of his limbs, but he doesn't use them functionally as you and I would. I think one thing that I discovered throughout everything that's happened to him, he bled out so much from his arm and his leg. They were, the London air ambulance team were actually going to amputate his arm and leg. So we thank God that they didn't. But he's been through such a long and hard journey. A lot of it he probably won't remember because he was, because of the fact he was clinically dead, he had the brain injury and he was in a vegetative state for about 6 months. So that part of his life, he would have been finishing his driving courses, finished off his GCSEs, his college degrees and things like that, and he didn't get to do. So when he started to come out of the brain injury, he was starting to converse with us and wake up and was like, did I finish my driving? I want to drive. And we're like, no, you haven't done anything. That was taken away from you. So it was a lot physically to see him in that state, mentally to see him in that state, and the fact that we couldn't speak to him or converse with him for a very long time, it's mentally broken all of us.
You said hypoxic brain damage. Hypoxic. Can you explain?
So the hypoxia is a lack of oxygen and blood to vital organs, but this is namely the brain. So if anyone wants to go and read up on it, your brain is obviously shaped like this. He had a lot of damage to the front lobes of his brain. I'm a bit of a nerd like that. I like to read everything. When they told me all of his diagnosis, I was researching. And usually when you're clinically dead for like 4 to 5 minutes, it's point of no return. So when I realised it was 55 minutes, I drew a breath and I'm like, this is serious. He probably may not ever be him again. I drew on my face to get me through, but the hypoxia, you can't see it. You can't see that brain injury until you're being scanned. I think when you have a traumatic brain injury, when you're hit over the head or you've collapsed and banged your head, you can see the physical damage. You can get worked on, but when it's inside internally, you just can't fathom what that looks like. So I had to do the research, and yeah, it's shocking to believe that he's survived this, because there's a few other boys who has been stabbed who suffered with that type of hypoxic brain injury. They haven't survived. They probably survived for a few months to a year, but died. So they were my point of reference to him surviving this. And then when he got past the 6 months, and then it got to the 7 months and the months were continuing, I was a bit like, okay, I always had faith that he's going to survive, but the quality of life I wasn't sure of. And I remember just keep on playing songs to him and talking to him. And I think with a hypoxic brain injury, you can never tell where it's going to go. And you've got to stand firm in your faith. But I would urge people to go and read up what hypoxic brain injury is and what it can do. And just be well aware of these type of injuries.
Tell me about James before.
Yeah.
Because the way you're talking, I mean, you being here and doing what you're doing, clearly you have a good relationship with your nephew, which is beautiful. So let us know what he was like before this incident.
James, he's such... And I remember some people would speak and be like, what was he like before? And for me, he still is. He still is that James with a different type of spin on his life now. James, he was very much the life and soul of every party, every function, work environment, college, school. He wasn't perfect, don't get me wrong. He was mischievous, but I remember his teacher said he was lovable mischievous because he would do little things because he couldn't help it, but he would do it with a good heart. So like sometimes I remember I used to try to bake back in the day, and he would come in, see me baking, and I'll have my frosting ready and he would just take a lick of the frosting. He would do little things like that to wind me up, but it's just James. I didn't expect any of the others to do it, but that was James. He was studying music technology. He wanted to be a DJ, a music producer, and he will. He was working. He was a gymnast coach, and a invigilator. So your stereotypical young black boy, he just defeated all those stereotypes. He was doing so much and more for the community. He was very involved in our church. Everybody knew him. He was just busy, but productively busy. He's a good boy,
And can you see that in recovery, how his personality is still maintained? Because I would imagine that he's still bubbly and still kind of mischievous as well.
I can see it. I think what really got to me when they diagnosed him to say he's got this severe brain injury, he's going to be severely disabled, I just thought, that's it, he won't be him. And I remember looking over him, watching, standing when he was in intensive care unit, ICU, and I saw in his eyes, he was fighting to come back. I saw something, and seeing how he was then, he always had that fighting spirit. So I think it's really hard to see him now, but he's still him. Like, I think unless you know James and know who he was, he's still him. So I think when people meet him for the first time and have heard of his story, they're like, oh my God, but he can talk, he's got banter. And I'm like, yeah, but that's James. That's all we know. But they wouldn't know that. And I remember like sometimes being in the hospital and he would try and like flirt with the nurses. I'm like, I'm your Aunt James, don't do that in front of me. But that's just him. And I think seeing him not have a great level of friendship groups anymore breaks my heart, because if he had that, he will be more of him. We will see a different him. And I think, yes, his life paused for that moment, and for 6 months we didn't see him transition to who he could be. But how he is now, I just want him to grow and just be him. And I think it's very hard seeing him depend on all of us to do things for him, especially his mum. I get very conscious of like, is that his personality, or is it us saying how he should be, how he could be? But I have faith, he will be fine eventually. Eventually is a very big, long word in our life at the moment, but he will be fine.
So he was like 18 when this happened? 17,
yeah,
gosh.
17, just turned 18.
And
yeah.
he's now just
He's
turned 20
got
last
20.
year.
He's going to be 21 this year, and he's got his plans to go raving in Ibiza. He says I'm too old to be travelling with him, so he wants to go with the mandem.
Louise.
Yeah, I'm not letting out my sight. By hook or by crook, I'll be in Ibiza with him. And I think this has happened. We are a very close family as it is, but this has made us even closer. Like, we check in morning, noon, night, like all day, every day on a video call. And that's just our life now. That's just what we do.
So one of the things we were talking about before is how close your family was, like you just mentioned. Yeah. How is it for, how is the family doing, and where are they at with you talking about James the way that you do?
That's such a fully loaded question. Every member of the family's got their own way of dealing with this, and I think it's grief in one sense, and I think some people don't understand when I talk about grief in this particular incident.
It's assumed that it's when someone's passed, but grief
is a big loss that we took, because the James that we knew was going to go on and change the world and be the best DJ and music producer can still happen, but happen, and it looks differently. His mum will never be the same, completely broken. So his mum's my sister. Stepdad, I find it hard to speak about what they're going through, because that's their journey, that's their time to speak on it. But I think all of us individually are on a different journey. I'm very open book, talk about his journey, because a lot of people want to hear his journey, want to see where he's at. He doesn't mind me talking about it, but I always check in with him to make sure I can speak on these things. And some of the stuff I say is probably repetitive, people know it, but I'm in a different space when I'm probably talking about it, so I see things differently. The rest of the family, like grandma, generational trauma is real. This has affected my mum to my daughter, who was 4 at the time. So seeing my mum, the strong matriarchal woman, dealing with everything, getting on with it, to see her not being able to be there for her grandson because he's in such a state in a hospital was hard. I was there at the hospital with him, but then it was middle of COVID, so a lot of the family's healing and trying to be there for him was taken away. It was taken away. So if COVID wouldn't have happened and this happened, it may be a different healing journey for each family member. But definitely his mum needs a lot of support. And I think it's easy for me to ask her, what support do you need? She doesn't know sometimes what she needs. I know she's tired. I know she needs respite. I know she just needs time away. And not time away from James and the situation, because that's always going to be there. Time away for her as a woman to find out who she is, rediscover who she is again. But they both need their own time. James needs his own time to just be him. And I think sometimes he feels like he's a burden on us, and he's not. He never will be. It's tiring. It's hard, but he would never be a burden. And I think individually we're all in different spaces.
You talked about the generational impact.
Yeah.
In terms of generational trauma, but with regards to like knife violence, what do you think could be, what kind of steps could be taken to try to break that cycle for future generations?
I think honesty and communication is two things that is probably not getting through to many generations. I feel when we have these discussions, we're all around the table trying to improve, trying to stop the killings. But yet we need to speak with the perpetrators and their families, if they're willing to speak, to be part of that solution, because we're missing that link. We don't generally know why they've done it, what led them to do it. I think with the generations, we have to look at every generation and see how it's impacted them. So when I sit back and look at my mum, she used to cook for my nephew, her grandson, every day. So that was taken away from her for a long period of time. How does she cope with that? Who does she, speak to about that? Because she wouldn't come to us. She's the mum. When I look at the aunts, how have they now transitioned from being the aunt to now also being carer to support and support my sister? When it comes to knife violence, what was their interaction and understanding of knife violence before? It may have been limited. It never happened to our family, and it's happened. I think when it comes to the younger generation and the cousins and the siblings, there needs to be a lot of support, because they are our future. And if we don't safeguard them and ensure mentally they understand what's happened and how to push forward and not feel they have to take on revenge, not feel that they have to just be fearful of society, of people now, there will be a broken generation there. And I think for the parents, my heart goes out to the parents, because I like to put different parts of communities in different sections, because you've got those hardworking parents that's trying to do everything day in, day out, but have to work, and they can't be there with their children. My mum used to say there's some people that grow up as latchkey kids and just let themselves in and do whatever. But then you've got parents who are generally just want to be at home and be in that space, and great. But where do we connect everybody together? You've got some parents who are on the probably bad part of life, and through whatever circumstances it's led them to be there. Part and parcel with the criminal justice system is probably not focused on supporting them through those choices and getting them out. It's not so easy to leave that lifestyle sometimes. But again, as a community, as parents, how do we connect the dots and support those parents? Because unfortunately, their lifestyle choices have led sometimes their children to be part of that lifestyle. And it's just caused destruction amongst communities. And I think if we look at it as a timeline of everybody's journey and try to collectively come together, we're going to keep fighting this constant battle of knife crime and knife violence.
You mentioned a little bit how it affects the relationships, dynamics between families and friend circles. Can you speak a little bit more about that? You're saying that about James's friendship circles kind of broken.
So his friends, he had a lot of people knew James, and he had a great, strong friendship group. I think I could talk of it from an outside looking in, and I will never understand what that young person's been through, what his friends have been through. And I used to be like, why are they not around? Why are they not helping? And they meant to be his friends. But as the journey's, gone on, we're coming up to 3 years this year, it must be so hard on them. They're seeing their best friend, lying there fighting for his life, but yet they have to walk in this world where they could potentially be stabbed themselves. And then added to that is the disability. you know, I remember when James turned 19 and we had a small little party for him. His friends came and we still had to physically feed James. And I said to his friend, you feed him. And they're like, what? How does that feel to them? As adults, we just get on with it because it's a done thing. But then that dynamic's different. They're used to bantering and, you know, tussling with their friends, and now they're caring and feeding for him. That's not been explored. How do we speak to young people about disability on the back of knife violence? It's not just a physical James being in the wheelchair. It could be their friends who's got colostomy bag, a loss of limbs. How do we expect young people to deal with that if we, as adults, find that hard? I think his friends are there, but I want them to be there more. But then they're young, they're studying, they're working, they're living life. How can I put that pressure on them?
And they're dealing with their grief, right? It's everyone's grief from a different perspective, because even for James, not having his friends there,
he just wants his friends there. And I think they don't understand. And I try to educate people on hypoxic brain injury. Because James has got the brain injury, he probably forget to text you back. So video call him, speak to him, see his face, see his body language. Just dropping a text, hey bro, okay, he won't text back for a good few hours because he's being cared for himself, he's got other hospital appointments, all these things going on. And then by the time he settles down in the evening, he's missed all the messages. He probably won't call back. So it's hard because you're like, James, call your friends. But he's like, but they need to call me. So it's very hard. It's very hard. But it's just finding ways, like put a timer on James's phone, right, call your friend at this time. And if they don't answer, send a voice note or just text. It's things like that we could potentially work on. But then we're like, but they're his friends, they need to check in.
It's one-sided. But then it's understandable why it's one-sided. It's just a catch kind of 22 to somewhat degree.
It is.
Yeah. Speaking about friends and educating people, what role do you think education plays in preventing knife violence, especially younger generations, as well as highlighting and letting them know, you know, the aftermath, the consequences of it?
I've always been raised on education is your key to your future, and whatever you're educated in is key. And I think we've got to keep speaking about it. I got to a stage where I was fed up of talking about it because it's out there. How much more education do we need? But when I speak to some people, they're not educated about it. And I don't like to call people uneducated because they just don't know. They're not in that space. I think education is key, but it's making it bespoke to that audience.
And it's who's educating
as well. You could have the best educator in the world, but if they haven't got that lived experience on it and lived experience to cope to now educate people, that's when it could be a bit tricky. You could have someone who's bereaved, who's gone through what we've gone through and want to educate people, but if they haven't healed and coped with their own trauma, educating someone could be quite frightening. It can give a different message because you're not in that right space to educate others. But I feel for me, everyone needs to collaborate, come together to create the education. There's great work being had and being done, but it's in silo. Some people naturally just won't work together. It is what it is. But when you find your niche to work together, work to educate parents, educate employers. Because I found, you know, working full time, trying to raise my daughter and then dealing with everything else, my employers weren't understanding what I was dealing with. So if they're not educated to support their employees, it's a battle already lost.
Yeah.
Educating faith groups. I'm Christian. I try to educate my faith group where I can, and go into other faith groups as well. Education is such a big tool, but be impactful in it. We can sit here all day and talk about it, but dropping the right knowledge at the right time is key. And I think some people, if you don't know, get to know. Reach out. There's so much resources, so much people in there talking about the same thing. I speak quite flippant sometimes. I'm like, how can you not know? But then that's not their world. And it is hard to understand. We still have to educate on this, but it is the key.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as you were saying about educating employers and established places of work, I would imagine, for example, having a teacher or in college, university, or school, and how that impacts a teacher who that's happened to one of their students. Let alone the family having to go to work and deal with that environment. It's Hey family, we hope you're enjoying the show. If you want to stay up to date with all things Black British Parent, we've got the perfect way for you to do just that. Join our mailing list and be the first to know about new episodes, exciting news, and upcoming events. It's super easy to sign up. Just head over to our website and into your email. Don't miss out on the latest from Black British Parent. Join our community today. Now, back to the show. You mentioned about resources. Can you highlight some of the initiatives and programs that Stand Up to Knife Violence implements?
Yeah, so we're new in this game. It's just there's so much people out there doing great work, and I think
feel free to mention them too.
Yeah, so I think what we are going to do as the campaign is one thing, because we needed to make noise in that space and highlight what we're doing. But I think what our strategy now is to supporting people who's been affected by knife violence, who's got life-changing injuries. Okay. Because we're in that space. James didn't have that great support. Mm-hmm. We had to fight for that support, what he's entitled to.
How long did that take? Sorry.
Oh, we're still fighting.
Okay.
It's coming up 3 years. There's certain things that he should be getting that he isn't getting. It's because we don't know. So I have fortunate to have great resources and networks, and I just tap into that and be like, look, he's struggling with this aspect. Can you help? Do you know somebody? Again, education, talking, communication is key. I personally don't want to be in this anti-knife crime, knife violence space for too long, because mentally it's draining. There's so many other people doing great work. I know I can add value, my family can add value, James's story can add value. It's impactful, but everybody in that space working together is the greatest voice. So we've had great support from a guy called David, he's a co-founder of Project for Youth Empowerment based in Croydon, but they do work outside London, inside London as well. They are amazing in what they do, and he personally has been a great confidant and support network for me, my family. There's so many charities and organisations that just, like the known ones, the Damilona Taylor Trust, the Ben Kinsella, Shaquan Sammy Plummer Foundation. There's so much I can list, and I'll probably just have to tell you them afterwards. But
that's fine.
I think really getting people together to strategically look where they can make the impact and push their resources. And the use of networks is so key. I joined LinkedIn very late in life, but that tool right there to be linked into different people is such a great resource. And I think we as a community, what you're doing with Black British Parent, that's a very unique space to have. And by one text to you goes out to your networks will help us in this fight, because I just find it's too much, it's too draining. Like I campaign tirelessly, but sometimes there is no change, because I wake up and I see another young boy killed. And it's not just one area, it's across London. It's a national problem. And I think for us to really network and work together, we have to see what benefit we are to each other and the impact we can have. Because at the end of the day, we have murderers walking around freely in our communities, and our young people are in cemeteries and they're dead. They're not coming back.
I also want to highlight this is happening to girls as well.
Oh yeah.
It's perhaps happening large majority to boys or young boys, but or men, should I say, or young people.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what is the most significant challenges in changing societal attitudes towards knife violence? And how can these changes be overcome, do you think?
I think society predominantly views it as a black issue. It disproportionately affects young black boys
Why do you think that is?
in London. I think there's so many contributing factors, you know, where they live, where they've grown up, what they've got access to. Racism, classism, there's so much factors. But the work I do professionally, it is a national problem. I think Cleveland, I was told Cleveland up in North somewhere, has got the highest rate of murders, knife violence. We're concentrated in London, and yes, we are Londoners, we need to deal with it. But I think if we don't sit back and look at it as a national problem, a mental health problem, because I can't fathom picking up a knife and wanting to injure someone. Even these boys that stabbed my nephew, I want to meet them one day. I don't want to do them harm. But mentally, I'm in a different space to say that. Ask me that when it just happened. I was full of rage. But nationally, as a society, if we don't see this as a mental health problem, as people throw out the words of public health approach, what does that look like to that young boy who's running scared for their life? What does that really look like? What does it look like to people in the NHS who's trying to save these boys, every day? What does a public health crisis look like? We're in it.
Well, why do you think, I mean, you won't necessarily have these answers, but just in your opinion, why do you think it's been projected as a black issue? I mean, yes, we understand London is a capital of the United Kingdom, but if it's happening in such large numbers amongst other races within this country, in other areas, surely those who are propagating it in that manner would be able to include the number, like the statistics as a whole, opposed to just one particular race of people.
I think when I look at the media, you have to look at what sells. And it used to be before that, this issue was highlighted and it was back page story. It's at the forefront again. But look at the spin on it. It's the government's getting things wrong. Communities are being failed. But for me, I look at it, I'm thinking, I don't care about all of that. I just want the killing to stop. I want the young people to stop carrying, is easier said than done, but to stop killing. And I think the media has a big part to play in this and how the narrative is put out there that it is a black on black issue, because it used to be reported on, especially like with the shootings and the killings, it was a Yardie thing. It was a black on black issue. So that's been kept through the generations.
Yeah, but all crimes amongst races is their race on race issue. It's not. So it's just, because most people are less likely to harm someone outside of their race. That's regardless of what race they are.
I think having your space now, speaking to journalists to see how they report and their mindset on reporting, because I've got a few journalists that come to me that want to share James's story, and I'm like, first question is why? What is it going to change because it's still happening? And I think the reporting of these issues, we can't keep calling it is a young person problem predominantly, but over the last 6 months, there's been a lot of older people from the age of 35 upwards that's been carrying knives and stabbing people. I've heard reports of 60-year-olds, dying through knife crime.
Some of it's domestic violence, domestic abuse.
So it is a societal issue, a national societal issue. And I think if we don't speak on the fact that the knife is a weapon of choice in the home, in the streets, how do we seek to prevent it?
And that's part of the problem why, again, I'm reluctant, or not reluctant, but hesitant of having these conversations, because I don't want to add to you. I mean, obviously, this is a black platform.
Yeah.
And we're talking about this, but at the same time, we have to talk about this because it's happening within our community. I think everybody should be talking about it in the communities that it's happening. Yeah. But maybe they are, and we're just not aware because it's not being propagated the way ours is.
Yeah.
Our issues are. I don't know. It's just something that makes it even more challenging to deal with. I think the way that, as you were saying, the way that the media spreads the information, I suppose. I don't even know if we can call it information in some ways. And it's interesting because obviously, I say obviously a lot, because it's social media has such an impact as well.
Yeah.
And a lot is shared on social media. It sounds like a bit hypocritical coming from someone like me, but it's interesting how the narratives are easily filtered or managed in a certain way. There's certain information that you can't get access to on social media, and there's some information that they allow.
Yeah.
So that makes it very challenging as well.
But I think your point is quite valid, and I'm a bookworm. I love going to libraries, and I think let's step away from social media and also have a one-to-one platform.
In person.
Yeah. I remember reading, I think in the Netherlands, they have a human library where you come and speak to people. Build that back again. We can use social media for the good and take out the bad, but also we have to understand what the bad is. But we have to be connected as a people, and that's your platform is amazing. But what everybody else is, doing with your platform, are they sharing? Are they making it part of their family discussions? If they're not doing that, then I hold them to account. So we as a people, we could say social media is great or bad, but we have our own minds. Research for us. Use that research for us. Don't put it out there and say, this is what I found, and this is what's gospel. Challenge it.
Yeah.
Find out what is really out there and what's known to be true.
I mean, this sharing information stuff as well. It's I can imagine to somewhat degree how difficult it is for you to talk about. And as you said, everything has its cycle. You can't be doing this forever. And I just think about families and them having to talk about, or perhaps not being able to talk about it, but wishing they could, to share these stories, and without those who are directly impacted, right, we won't understand necessarily what it's like until it happens to us. And that's the unfortunate thing it takes to happen to us, because everyone can have a judgment beforehand. What was your kind of perspective prior to this happening to your family with regards to it, if you can share that?
I think I've already, I was in that space professionally, so I work for the police as staff, and I've been in the job for about 16 years now.
I notice the way you say that, your tone just kind of...
No, because I know people, she's a Fed and all of that. I'm very conscious when I speak about policing, because I know just saying I work for the police is traumatizing to some people. And then also they can't see why I work for the police. They will call me all these other names under the sun. I get it. I don't take it personally.
You still do?
I still do. I think seeing knife crime professionally and then now seeing it happen to me personally through my nephew, I was at a crossroads of, I work for the police because I know what I want to bring and what I can give. But then when it happened to my nephew, I was like, I don't think I can work for the police anymore, because my mind was elsewhere. I wanted revenge. I don't now. I think my judgment on knife violence and knife crime was very, probably judgmental, because I dealt with the back end of it when young people were coming into custody suites and being arrested. So I saw it as, and it was predominantly, the areas I worked in was predominantly black areas, so I just saw young black boys coming in time and time again. My colleagues used to call me the social worker at work, because I felt I had to help. It was my calling to help them. But then if I'm here trying to save them in that space, who teaches them the consequences of their actions? Yeah, when they go to the courts, yeah, when they go to prison. But generally, who takes them to a side and be like, hey, what, we can't be doing this. You're killing your own. You're killing generations. So I was very desensitized to a point. I was active in the spaces behind the scenes on campaigning and trying to create change. But again, on the flip side, I was judgmental because I saw it every day. It was too much. And before I left the front line, I work in the offices now, I remember a young boy came into custody and he had a massive Rambo. This was 8 years ago. Massive Rambo knife. And that's the first time I've seen it live, right there. And I didn't know what to say to him. I didn't have any words. And I'm not normally speechless. I was shocked. But then when I called his mum to speak about that, she was unaware. So my understanding of knife crime was, I was very aware of what it did to communities. But then when it happened to my nephew, I blamed communities, I blamed society. I was angry that this happened to my nephew and young black boys were involved. But as the case progressed and it went to trial, I realised it wasn't just young black boys. A woman, a girl was involved. She's a woman now. All different ethnicities was involved. So that's why I keep saying it's not just a black issue.
Yeah. How can individuals, especially young people, actively contribute to preventing knife violence in their communities?
It's such a hard one because I don't want to put it on the young people.
Of course not.
Because as
But I did say individuals.
I start with the young people first. As adults, I feel we have failed the young people. We weren't advocating for them enough. All the cuts, the fundings, all of that, we could have been more vocal, how we are now. As individuals, everyone needs to take this knife violence situation seriously, and it should be on their forefront of their agenda. It's traumatic, it's tiring, it's draining, but until we all individually take responsibility, we just look, oh, it's the next man's problem, next woman's problem, next family's problem. You don't want it to get to your doorstep. For the young people.
It's just mad that we have to even look at it that way. Do you get
to.
what I mean? To even say it like you don't want it to come. We shouldn't have to be having that conversation. We should just know that this is our community.
Yeah, but are we a community? We all live transient lives. We're very busy.
Yeah.
But when we stop and breathe, COVID, I hate that it happened, but it stopped the world.
Yeah.
We became a different type of community. Online, probably. But are we generally a real community? I know in my community, because I've lived there for a long time with my mum, I know the people that lived there. My mum knows the people that live there. But if I move to a new community, how do I get involved in that type of community? How do I bring myself into that? I think for the young people, understand your mental health. Understand your triggers. Understand when to walk away, when to run away. Because when you're being run down and chased down, you just need to save you. You don't need to be the big man I want to fight or the big girl I want to fight. Understand sometimes words hurt, but when you pick up that knife or you're in a situation where you have to defend yourself, you can't take that back. My nephew was out of my sister's eyesight for 30 seconds to a minute and didn't return back. Those split seconds of your life, be it if you are the perpetrator seeking revenge on someone or to do something, changes your life and that person's life forever. For the young people that's not caught up in this and just fearful or just want to do what they're doing in their life, keep doing you. I can't live in fear. I can't. It's easier because I'm a grown adult. I can walk where I want to go, and it's very hard for young people to just navigate coming at the end of their road to get on a bus to go somewhere where they need to go. I can't even fathom their life, the life they have to live. But just have love in your heart, no hate. Just strive to do good and influence others. You might have a group of friends or different circle of friends who are probably on roads or doing what they're doing. Just try and interject some love and hope into their life. That's what I want them to do. I don't want them to be at the forefront of the campaigns. They should be aspiring to do better things, greater things. Just, have love in their heart.
We were talking about individuals and young people. What do you think the government and the other institutions could be doing more of to help prevent this from happening?
So when communities speak, listen. If they need more funding and they need more youth centres, whatever they need. Fund them. Hold them to account as well to see where that fund is going. Fund them. Work with them. So like, we're across the road from Brixton Police Station. There is some great engagement teams there that generally works with communities. And Brixton has its history. It's very hard to connect with some communities because of the trauma. The engagement team that works in Lambeth and Southwark has got a very special way of working with communities, and I need to reintroduce you to them again. Having someone or a team of people that can network with communities on a one-to-one level is key. Sometimes I think institutions feel like they've got to have this big mass group of people going out and speaking to everyone. No, it just takes one individual officer to do that work, to build upon that work. I think we need to get more officers, police officers, in roles of engagement to build that trust. And it's not trust because it's trust that's needed on both parts. The officers need to trust that the community will come to them and they can go to the communities when there is any issues. And I just feel sometimes institutions are just institutions, but yet people working for them are humans. Where is the disconnect? I remember, colleagues used to call me the social worker, but I'm like, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with caring?
Perhaps that should be part of the job description, because if you're dealing with young people, there has to be a level of understanding of some of the
a level
social
of
issues,
understanding of social issues. And when I used to teach some of the staff that I used to work with, I used to say to them, when you come into that space, especially when they worked in the custody suites, I used to say, don't just come in and work to work. Come in an hour before, walk around the area, understand the communities that you are serving. Yes, you're in the custody suites and you deal with the arrested, the detained, but you're still serving that community. And I think until you humanize it, whatever you're going through, you're just seen as that person with the pips on their shoulders, with the sergeant epaulets, with the police staff epaulets on. I can only speak from policing, but that can transcend into when you're working for the NHS. If you're a paramedic and you're dealing with the community, remember, they've got a story, you've got a story. You don't have that split second to connect, but just hold back the judgment, I don't understand why they're looking at me and treat me this way. You might not ever understand.
It's a human being. That's a human
They've
being.
gone through something.
And
I remember one of my colleagues said to me, we are like an onion. We've all got layers. That inner child is there. How do we get back to that? What's caused all these layers? Trauma, pain, grief, anger, rage. I walk around with rage every day, but I have to suppress it. It's hard. It's so hard, but we all need to work better together.
one of the things I remember coming up, maybe within the last 3 or 4 years on social media and in the news, was the idea that a lot of the police officers that are recruited are from outside of London, so they're out of touch with, and obviously they've had the propagation from media add to certain stereotypes that they may have. Is that something that's still happening?
So I'm not really fully aware of the recruitment strands and what they're doing, but what I do know is you put the application out there, whoever applies, be it that they live outside of London or they live in London. And I think sometimes that notion probably needs to be myth bust, because you can have people live in London and don't know their issues.
I appreciate that,
So I think for communities, I would say get in touch with your local officers. There's a lot of local training that goes ahead and centrally. If you want to be that voice to, speak to these officers, get in touch. I know people don't want to work with the police, but until you're part of that change, how are we going to ensure and govern what's being done? Get in touch with your local officers, get in touch with your outreach teams. I think if you Google Met Police outreach teams, there's a list of outreach officers that you can get in contact with, see what training looks like, get involved, or if you don't want to get involved and just know, educate yourself on that. I've worked with I've been in the job for 16 years. I've worked with a whole host of different officers, born in London, bred in London, but left and, moved out of London. Some who lived out of London now, live in London, work in London. I always say to officers, just know the community that you're serving. But yeah, I'm not here to plug for the police.
No.
I'm not. But if people generally have the passion to want to work for the police, apply, give it a go. If it's for you, great. If not, you've tried it. Same with any other institution. If we're not in there to see what's really going on and to see the change, then how do we influence that? Having someone like me there is great, but I've been in for such a long time. My mindset's probably a lot different to these young people coming in. Like, I need to be educated sometimes. I need to be held to account sometimes for me being in the Met personally, but not as an organisation. And I think if we don't have these honest conversations, change won't happen.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about people in the community who've been collecting knives and the difficulties of handing them in.
Yeah.
And what's your thoughts and reflections on that kind of...
I think education is key. Again, this is a national problem, and I've seen different community spaces.
When I say handing them in, I mean handing them to police station.
Yeah, I've seen that, yeah. So a while back, there was the knife amnesty bins that policing constabularies used to use. I don't know if every constabulary has that. I know when people hand it in, it's such a hard one, because I've been on the beat back in the day. I would feel a certain type of way if someone came and just handed me a knife. But then I'd be like, why are they doing it? They didn't have to come into a police station, so they handed it in for a reason. I think there needs to be a dialogue with every police constabulary and communities to say, this is our agreement when you hand in a knife. I'm big on education and collaborative approach. I get why people just want to hand in knives and get off the street. I totally understand that. But if we're not having an agreement with that police station or the borough to say, this is me, I'm going to hand it in. I'm going to hand it in at, random times. Your officers probably don't know who I am. Educate those officers. And I think sometimes a lot of communities don't understand, it's not that police officer that's there working that day that's going to work there next week. It could be a whole host of different people. I think there needs to be a bit more collaboration, because at the end of the day, community members are not going to stop collecting these knives. And if that's the safest way to do it, through people bringing knives to them, I applaud that, because at the end of the day, we want these knives off the streets. But the question is, how are these knives getting on the streets in the first place? Why are they on the streets in the first place? Why are these young people harbouring these knives and keeping these knives? It has to be a joint-up approach.
Which leads me to my next question, my thoughts. Recently, there's been a ban on zombie knives. Can you please, I'm confused, what is a zombie knife? Because I thought, when I watched a news clip, and short one, obviously, and there was a family that was saying that their son, if I recall, had been stabbed by a sword. So this ban on zombie knife doesn't include the swords, and that's quite a big knife. And I'm under the impression a zombie knife is a zombie knife because of the branding and stuff on it, but it could be a similar knife without that branding, and it wouldn't necessarily be. So please, if you, I don't know if you know more about it than I do, if you can explain.
I do know more, and my mind is so frazzled by it. So there's zombie knives, Rambo knives, machetes, swords, kitchen knives. The type of knives that's being used are the zombies and the Rambo knives. Rambos were probably more back in the day-ish, but the zombie knives are prevalent now. And I think the ban on the zombie knives, what the campaigns are doing is to stop all sales, everything to make it illegal. I know I sit on a knife crime working group, a national group, and we were discussing the legislative changes on the zombie knives, on all knives to be fair. And I think what the issue is there's certain type of obviously legal loopholes and the brandings on there that the law hasn't caught up with, and that they're trying to get the correct legislative change to ensure there is a ban. I think unless we sit down with the lawmakers, the academics who's looking at the different type of knives that's out there, because you could Google now, zombie knives and all the different type of knives that's out there, including the Rambo knives. Unless we have a clear understanding of what these knives are, we need to campaign differently. A ban on all knives is great. I would love that to happen. But then when I speak to people who work in agriculture and horticulture who uses machetes for the right reasons, what does that impact look like to them? So we need to have a very clear understanding of what a ban means for particular knives. And especially like that parent, he was stabbed with a sword. If that doesn't fall under it, we're banning one type of knives, but what about the other? When James got stabbed, there was 5 knives found after his attack. And one included a kitchen knife, a zombie knife, a Rambo knife, and a large ninja sword. And instantly I'm like, how did they get these knives? Where did it come from? And you could Google, you could buy, I remember one of my colleagues said, he could buy a collection of knives online easily than going into Tesco's and buying paracetamol because his ID will be challenged.
Yeah.
How is that normal? I think,
It's
a lot. It's just seeing, when I went to court, seeing those knives that still had my nephew's blood on it. We are in a crisis.
I can't imagine what that must have been like. I'm sorry. I've recently been a part of discussions with regards to having bleed kits
Yes.
in different spaces
Yeah.
and needing more of them. Can you share your thoughts on that?
So recently, we went back to Mitesfield where it happened, and we had a community event to discuss the impact of knife crime on communities. And we was donated a bleed kit from the Daniel Bird Foundation. Daniel was killed a few years ago, and his mum campaigned that if he had a bleed kit there, an intervention there, he would still be alive today. And I think bleed control kits are an amazing tool to stop someone from bleeding out and dying. And it's not just for knife crime, it can happen in any circumstance. They are an amazing tool. There's so many people doing campaigns around the bleed control kits. It is needed, but the education of using
that was part of the conversation. Yeah,
needs to be had. It needs to be delivered in all schools, colleges, and businesses.
Mm-hmm. And communities as well.
Yeah, definitely community. So one of the bleed control kits is in Mitesfield Community Centre. We are yet to do the second part, the education bit. But then there are videos on YouTube. There's people going out there and doing the training, the education. But I think I look at the wider issue. Boys are still being stabbed. Young girls are still being stabbed on the streets. People are still being stabbed on the streets. They're dying. If we don't know how to do trauma first aid, CPR, we can have the bleed control kit there, or education could be there, but when you freeze in that moment to see all of that blood, all of that,
and seeing the wound,
it needs to be ingrained in us. Trauma first aid needs to happen in our communities, in all spaces. And I think not understanding trauma first aid is a big part of the problem. I remember hearing, when James was having his first aid by community members, some people are like, put pressure here, put pressure here. He was bleeding out elsewhere. So I think as communities, we see this happen daily. We need to understand if St John's Ambulance or the London Ambulance Service or the London Air Ambulance or whoever it is that wants to train communities that they can understand how to do a primary examination of someone who's been stabbed, because you can get stabbed here, but then the knife could have, injured somewhere else and have an internal bleed. So that's never going to help that person in that situation. And I think bleed control kits are amazing, but the education has to come with it.
100%.
You could have a bleed control kit sitting here, someone gets stabbed. If you don't know how to use it,
I probably would freeze and panic and not know what to do.
But that's normal. But I think what needs to... So I teach my nephew, my nieces, and my daughter, who's 6 now, I teach her how to do trauma first aid. I said, if someone gets a cut on your arm, what do you do? Because I've got the knowledge and the know-how. I teach anyone, any young person who I'm in contact with, how to do trauma first aid. And I think if you run a community centre, if you run a faith group, if you're part of anything where you have control with community funding and spaces, you should be doing first aid, trauma first aid, standard. Companies should be doing it as a standard.
I want to say thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Please, if you have a message that you would like to share with Black British parents, please, by all means.
I think when it comes to knife violence, we can't shy away from the fact that it's happening to our communities. And I've got a real clear message for anybody who is a mother, a father, an aunt, a grandparent, whatever you are in this young person's life, who is a perpetrator, who has done that to somebody else. Please reach out and try to build bridges, because at the end of the day, it's always going to be an us against them approach, because they've done this. Not many families are willing to accept being reached out to because they've lost their loved one. I'm in a different space. I want to hear from the perpetrators' families. I want to see how we can build the bridges, because I want the killings to stop. And as I said before, we do have murderers walking freely in our communities. Our cemeteries are full of our young people. This needs to stop. We are losing generations to the streets. This needs to stop. We need to call a gang truce. We need to understand conflict resolution, and we need to do it now.
Thank you. And please briefly explain what Stand Up to Knife Violence does and how they can get in touch with you as well.
So you can get in touch with us. We've got Twitter, Instagram. Our main port of information is on Instagram, and it's a sharing of my nephew James's story. And we are trying to get into spaces, into schools and colleges, but more so into community spaces and to employers to educate them on the impact of knife violence. But we are going to be setting up our charity to support young people who's been affected by knife violence and who's been left with life-changing injuries. And we want to work collaboratively with anti-knife violence charities to come together to create impactful community change.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in for another one of Black British Parents podcast episodes. I hope it was informative. I hope it was helpful in some way. But yeah, thank you. Until next time.